There are day spas built along the river, further up the river, but you can also come here for free, where I'm sitting right now, and literally just take a dip in this, I guess, gift from nature. I think this is paradise.
Hey everyone, I'm Tim, and I've just finished a 9-month odyssey around Latin America. Now I'm reopening my diaries, and this time I'm bringing you along with me. Week by week, country by country, all the colors, all the craziness, all the food, all the music, and all the splendor. 9 months when each morning was a new adventure. The road was my companion, and Latin America cast its spell on me. This is my Latin America Diaries. Welcome back to Latin America Diaries. After leaving Manuel Antonio National Park, I took one of the through buses from that region up to San José, the capital of Costa Rica. The buses in Costa Rica, it's a fairly compact country, so they don't run so much as long distance coaches. They're more like extended versions of local buses, so that was surprising, but it was quite an easy system to navigate. It's literally just you get on the bus, you pay the driver, and it takes you where you want to go. I arrived in San José at about 8 p.m. and immediately checked into the Nativus Art Hostel, which was indeed full of art. And yes, I should probably say, before all the boomers watching jump into the comments, I indeed do know the way to San Jose. It's about a 3-hour drive from Manuel Antonio. I was in San Jose for 2 reasons. The first one was practical. I needed to change buses in San Jose before heading onwards up to the Costa Rican highlands. That would be my next destination. But secondly, I had a bit of personal business to take care of, if you like, some life admin. The first thing was that I needed to buy a charm for Costa Rica for my charm bracelet, and to fulfill that need, I went to a local market where I found a small charm of a monkey's face, which would be perfect after my time spent in Manuel Antonio National Park. And secondly, I needed to find a place to celebrate the Costa Rican edition of my 40th birthday. After all, this was the whole purpose of the trip, right? So I went to downtown San Jose. I found a small cafe bar with an upstairs area and a balcony overlooking the streets of the capital, and I ordered a Costa Rican specialty, a flan de coco, which is a bit like a coconut creme brulee. And up there, with the rain pouring down over the city, I celebrated my birthday once again. San Jose is not necessarily the most enticing place in Costa Rica. Most people come to Costa Rica with ideas of, verdant jungle and lagoons and beaches and rainforest-filled mountains, and San Jose is not that. It is a fairly utilitarian city. It's not terrible, but I think that a lot of people, if they were coming to Costa Rica and expecting to see beaches and rainforest straight away, they might be a little bit disappointed. That said, there are still some highlights in the city. The National Theatre of Costa Rica is this gorgeous old building in the central district of the capital, but eventually it was time for me to move on, so I made my way to the bus station and booked my ticket onwards to my next destination. Costa Rica is a country with a fascinating history because it developed a little differently from the other countries in Latin America under Spanish rule. When the Spanish Empire controlled most of the region, it wasn't organized into the modern countries that we know today. Instead, it was divided into large administrative territories called viceroyalties, which were further broken down into smaller regions. Within that system, much of Central America, including Costa Rica, was governed through a regional division known as the Captaincy General of Guatemala. But here's the key point. Costa Rica was really on the edge of that empire, geographically distant, economically minor, difficult to access. It was really like out there on the periphery, like one of the most remote parts of the Spanish colonial empire in Latin America. As a result, Spanish control here was relatively light compared to, say, Mexico or Peru. Rather than investing in large-scale mining or building giant colonial cities, Costa Rica developed more as a rural agricultural frontier. Small settlements, farming communities and cattle ranches spread through the landscape, with much of the territory still covered in dense forest. Because of that isolation, Costa Rica didn't evolve in the same way as other countries. It didn't develop the same rigid control systems or social structures that, say, Mexico or Peru or Argentina did. Instead, life here was much more sort of self-sustaining and dispersed. And as independence movements swept across Central America from 1821 onwards, Costa Rica wasn't really liberated through great upheaval. The news arrived late, and it was more of a gentle transition than a full-blown revolution against the Spanish Empire. That sense of separation from the world and calm evolution is still a big part of Costa Rica's national psyche today. I boarded a bus from San Jose and headed towards Ciudad Quesada, a town up in the northern Costa Rican highlands, and from there changed to another bus bound for La Fortuna, my next destination. As I pulled into La Fortuna, it started raining, and I mean seriously raining, like it was bucketing down. I soon learned that La Fortuna isn't just a rainy mountain town in an already rainy country during the rainy season, it's one of the rainiest parts of this already rainy country during the rainy season. The hostel where I would be staying in La Fortuna was only about a kilometer from the bus station, and it's absolutely something that I could have walked, but not in that rain. I would have been soaked. In fact, I called an Uber and I got soaked simply from the couple of seconds that I had to run from the bus station to the Uber and get my luggage into the boot. While I was standing at the bus station, in fact, I asked someone if the rain would be like a passing shower, sort of, is the rain going to stop anytime soon? And this guy just looked at me like, no. I checked into the Asha hostel run by an Indian owner from Maharashtra who had been traveling through Costa Rica before the COVID period and ended up getting stuck here when the world shut down. He decided to stay, eventually opened a really interesting hostel with a shisha bar and a small supermarket attached. There was even an Indian restaurant that he owned just down the road. The next morning I set out in my raincoat in an Uber towards the La Fortuna waterfall. The La Fortuna waterfall is a spectacular 70-meter drop on the Fortuna River, which gives the town its name. From the viewpoint, you get this incredible sight of water plunging straight down into dense green canyon walls. While I was there, it started spitting with rain again. And you could ask the question, I mean, is it really that great of a place if it's raining all the time? But that's exactly the point. I mean, would the La Fortuna waterfall and the canyon that it drops into, would it be this spectacular and lush if it wasn't for the year-round rain? I don't think so. The walk down to the base of the waterfall was just as impressive. Moss-covered trees, thick roots twisting through the ground, butterflies flickering through the mist, and the constant roar of the falls growing louder with every step. At the bottom, the waterfall towers above you. It's powerful, loud, and pretty overwhelming. Swimming is sometimes allowed in the pool at the base of the waterfall. However, because it was the rainy season and because it was indeed raining, at that time swimming was prohibited for people's safety. After climbing back up, I stopped for a coffee at the entrance, and the staff there were really friendly, and this was going to be a recurring theme of my time in Costa Rica. And then I jumped in an Uber and headed out for the free hot springs.
So as well as being known for its waterfall that we've already visited, La Fortuna is known for its hot springs. Now, these just aren't any normal hot springs. This is actually a river that travels near the town of La Fortuna, and it travels right past the volcano Arenal, which means that the geothermal activity, it's a dormant volcano, but there is still enough geothermal activity to heat the water. So I'm just sitting here in a river, which is basically turned into a hot spring. I mean, this is incredible.
There are luxury resorts in the area that have taken advantage of the geology and charge you for the experience, but I was after something cheaper and a bit more natural. So instead, the Uber driver dropped me at a small bridge in the road, and I made my way down on foot along with a couple of other intrepid travelers. You make your way down to the river and then you're just there, literally sitting in the middle of the jungle with this warm flowing water moving all around you. It's incredible, it's beautiful. I could have stayed there forever. And then of course it started raining again. Now I had brought my dry bag and my raincoat, and they were protecting most of my stuff like my phone and my wallet and so on, but my clothes and my towel were still getting wet. So eventually I needed to get out of the river and start my way back. I dried off, put my clothes back on, and then headed back up to the road and wanted to call an Uber and thought that I would find some place to shelter from the rain while I was waiting for it. In fact, I couldn't do either because the area didn't have cell phone signal and there was no shelter in sight. I did walk up to the entrance of one of these expensive spa resorts and was quickly told that if I wasn't a client there, that I wasn't allowed to use their security post to shelter, which miffed me a bit, but I mean, fair enough. So I ended up having to walk about the 1.5 kilometers up to the entrance to the Volcano Arenal Ecological Park entrance, and there I was able to use their Wi-Fi and stand under a small shelter while I waited for my Uber to take me back to the hostel. Of course, I wasn't too worried about being completely drenched, but it was more about would an Uber accept me in their car to take me back to the town of La Fortuna if I was soaked to the bone. Anyway, I managed to get back to La Fortuna, the town. I got back to the hostel, I dried off, and then by then the rain had stopped for a while, so I headed down to the El Salto Falls, which are in the near the center of the town of La Fortuna. This is another natural swimming spot further down the same river as the Fortuna Falls, and here the water is calmer and locals and travelers alike come to swim. There's a rope swing hanging over the river, and people were launching themselves into the water, laughing, drifting along, and then climbing back up to do it all over again.
So Costa Rican Spanish is its own dialect, as Spanish is in every country. And there is a particular expression which is very peculiar to Costa Rican Spanish, and it's pura vida. And pura vida means pure life, and it gets used as hello, goodbye, thank you, you're welcome, best of luck, bon voyage. Like, it gets used for everything. And I'd always thought that that was kind of cute, but being here now, I'm starting to understand why people in Costa Rica say pure life for everything.
The next morning it was time to move on from La Fortuna and towards my next destination, Monteverde. If you're enjoying this glimpse of Pura Vida, consider giving the video a like, subscribe to my channel, and share this video on your social media. And if you'd like to spread Pura Vida a little bit further afield, then please tell your family and friends about my work here. It really helps me grow my audience and a bit of a community around my channel. That morning, I was headed from La Fortuna on to the transit town of Tileran. Tileran is a key junction town on the far side of Volcano Arenal, where buses connect onwards to different parts of Costa Rica and into neighboring Nicaragua. The route from La Fortuna skirts both Lake Arenal and the volcano itself, making for a winding, scenic, but slightly intense journey through the highlands. I got chatting on the bus with a British backpacker who was heading to Tileran to continue her journey onwards through towards Nicaragua. She was sitting in the seat behind me on the bus, and we spent the first 20 minutes of the journey chatting. However, the twists and turns in the road and me turning back to talk with her, with that, I started feeling pretty car sick after a while, so I popped a Quells and told her that I might try and sleep. I spent the rest of the journey trying to keep my eyes focused on the horizon and my breakfast down in my stomach. We eventually arrived in Tileran, a functional but unremarkable bus station where I had a couple of hours to wait for the connection to Monteverde. The next bus then picked me up and took me all the way up to the mountaintop retreat of Monteverde, where I checked into the hostel Monteverde Backpackers. Monteverde would be my last destination in Costa Rica. It's a pretty town, or at least it's surrounded by pretty mountains. Many people, I guess in the subcontinent, would probably refer to it as a hill station. It's surrounded by cool, misty rainforest and cloud forest just beyond the town limits. The hostel itself was okay. It was a bit sort of cool, damp, dark and musty, but then a lot of things in Monteverde are like that anyway, because you're literally up on top of a mountain in a cloud forest which doesn't get a lot of sunlight, so the whole town is kind of damp and wet and a bit dark. There are options, I guess, which would be a bit sleeker or a bit, I guess, drier, maybe. But in Costa Rica and in Monteverde, that means spending probably 50 to 100 US dollars per night, which isn't really in a backpacker's budget. And besides, I only need to spend 2 nights there. And it was good enough for what I paid for it. In addition, they also had a do-it-yourself breakfast, so I went out the next morning with a full stomach. I had booked a visit to the Salvatore Adventure Park, one of these ecological adventure parks that Monteverde does so well. And they picked me up from the hostel and drove me further up the mountain to the park entrance. And from the moment you arrive, it's clear that this place is incredibly well organized. There's a proper check-in area, structured entry points for the canopy walks, zipline courses, and cloud forest trails. It's all running like clockwork. I had already sort of experienced cloud forests in Mindo in Ecuador. However, I had sort of been saving myself there for this place here in Costa Rica because I knew that this would be a great experience, and I'm so glad that I did. I walked into the park and began the canopy walk, which starts as a gentle trail through the forest before rising to the treetops. It didn't take long before I spotted my first howler monkeys. These are the same monkeys that I had heard but not glimpsed in Manuel Antonio National Park and earlier in Colombia as well. Howler monkeys tend to make their unmistakable calls early in the morning, echoing through the forest before retreating deep into the canopy for the rest of the day. From there, the trail opened up into Monteverde's famous hanging bridges, long walkways suspended high across valleys and between treetops. Walking through them, you're completely immersed in the cloud forest canopy. The clouds themselves drift through the forest at your level, wrapping around the trees, so it genuinely feels like you're walking through mist suspended in mid-air. It's an incredible sensation, almost like floating through the forest alongside the birds that live there. From this height, you notice details that you would completely miss from the ground. Orchids tucked into branches, moss covering every trunk and limb, and layers of forest stretching out in every direction. Everything is alive, humid, and green. The flora is truly striking here. Deep red and purple tropical flowers, enormous moss-covered branches, and dense vegetation that feels untouched and ancient. At one point, I spotted a small yellow bird, possibly a warbler, similar to the ones that I had seen in the Galapagos Islands. Later, I also saw a brown finch-like bird, although I never quite identified what the species was. I also came across another striking bird, black plumage with grey underparts and a vivid orange beak. Its call echoed through the trees, adding to the atmosphere of the forest. The whole experience felt a bit unreal. It was just so colourful, so vivid, so unreal is the only word for it. It felt like stepping onto a movie set, but that movie would be somewhere between like being lost in the jungle and Jurassic Park. Below me, the forest dropped away into deep ravines with rivers cutting through the valley floor. Eventually I reached the end of the trail and waited for the shuttle bus to take me back down into the town of Monteverde. While I was waiting, I sat there in a small cafe and had a fresh watermelon juice. Pura vida indeed. Back in town, I considered doing a couple of the other things that the region is famous for. I considered doing a coffee tour, however, I had already done one in Colombia and I had learned a bit about the local coffee growing in Mexico at the start of my trip, so I decided against that, but instead I still sampled some of the locally grown coffee and all I can say is wow, it was delicious. There are also nighttime jungle tours that you can take out of Monteverde, however, given my general aversion to creepy crawlies and the like, I decided to skip that. Instead, I spent the afternoon doing a bit of life admin. I got some toiletries products that I'd been running low on, and I also had to rebook a flight between Malaysia and Australia for about 3 months from that date. because the flight that I already had booked was cancelled due to the closure of Jetstar Asia Airlines. So that was pretty much the afternoon in Monteverde planned. The next morning I boarded a bus very early and headed from the highlands back down to the lowlands of Costa Rica and back to the Pan American Highway, from where I would take a bus onwards to my next destination and my next country. To find out more about that, you'll need to tune in again next time to Latin America Diaries. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you then.